Don't kill me, my son. Don't take away the life I built. I did it for you. All of it was for you. I killed your capacity for love, for joy, for simple decency, and I replaced it with ambition. The cold, sterile air of the evergreen retirement home was a poor substitute for the humid, vibrant warmth of the life Elias once knew. Room 302, his final dwelling, was small, dominated by a single window that offered a view of a patch of perpetually brown lawn and a fence. The room was not unkind, but it was empty, empty of the laughter, the smells, and the chaos that had defined his 70-odd years. His only companion was a battered, leather-bound journal, in the haunting echo of a phrase he had spoken only once, 20 years ago. Don't kill me, my son. Elias was a shadow of the man who had built a small empire from nothing, a man whose hands, once calloused from laying brick and wood, now trembled with the tremor of age. He had been a builder in the truest sense, of houses, of wealth, and, he had desperately hoped, of a strong family. His wife, Clara, the anchor of his tumultuous life, had passed 5 years prior, leaving a void that the staff's polite inquiries and the nurse's careful steps could never fill. Her death was the official reason he was here, a practical necessity, or so his son Julian had argued. But Elias knew the real reason. Clara was the dam, her death was the flood. Julian, the name was a paradox in Elias's mouth, a son who was both his greatest pride and his deepest, most agonizing failure. Julian was a success by any modern metric, a sharp-suited executive, a man who spoke in corporate jargon, and whose life was measured in stock portfolios and quarterly reports. He was everything Elias had worked to make him, and yet somehow nothing like the man Elias had hoped he would be. Julian visited on the second Sunday of every month, promptly at 2 p.m. He would stay for precisely 30 minutes. The conversations were always the same, a brief, hollow inquiry about Elias's health, a recitation of Julian's latest business achievements, and a perfunctory sigh of relief that Elias was settled and well cared for. There was never any mention of the past, never any discussion of the thing that lay between them like a vast, poisoned ocean. Today was the second Sunday. Elias adjusted the thin blue blanket over his knees and waited. The clock on the wall, a cheap plastic thing, ticked with a relentless, accusatory rhythm. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Time is running out. When the door opened, Julian stood there, impeccably dressed, carrying a small, cellophane-wrapped bouquet of grocery store daisies. He never brought anything meaningful, just tokens that served as proof of the visit, not an expression of love. "Dad," Julian said, his voice measured, almost practiced. "How are you? You look rested." Elias managed a weak smile. "I'm alive, Julian. That's the best one can hope for here." Julian offered a tight, professional smile in return. He placed the daisies on the bedside table, careful not to disturb the few books stacked there. He pulled the visitor's chair a polite distance away and sat on the edge. "The merger went through," Julian announced, leaning forward, an excitement in his eyes that Elias hadn't seen directed toward him in decades. "We're going to be the largest logistics firm on the West Coast. I'm up for the chief operating officer position." "That's very good, son," Elias replied, his voice raspy. He truly was proud, but the pride was always tainted. "Your mother would have been thrilled." The mention of Clara caused a momentary flicker of pain in Julian's eyes, quickly masked. "Yes, well, she always wanted me to reach my potential." He glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the worn leather journal. "Is there anything you need? The nurse said you refused your afternoon walk yesterday." "My legs are tired, Julian. They've done a lot of walking in 70 years. Elias shifted, the urge to breach the silence that was indeed killing him, suddenly overwhelming. "Julian, before you go, can we talk? Really talk?" Julian's posture instantly stiffened. The corporate mask solidified. Dad, I have a conference call at 4. You know how demanding the new role is. What is it? Is the radiator broken again? I can call maintenance. It's not the radiator, Elias said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It's about the bridge. The effect of the two words was immediate and devastating. Julian's face went white. He stood up so quickly the chair scraped loudly across the linoleum floor. The air in the small room became thick and charged, as if a storm had just been conjured. No, Julian breathed, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pure, unfiltered resentment. We agreed. We never talk about that. But Julian, I'm dying here, Elias insisted, the tremor in his hands worsening. Not quickly, maybe, but surely. I need to make peace. I need you to understand why. Julian retreated toward the door, his whole body recoiling from the conversation. He didn't look like a successful executive anymore. He looked like the terrified 20-year-old he had been that night. I have to go, Julian mumbled, his hand already on the cool metal of the doorknob. I'll see you next month, Dad. Try to rest. And then he was gone, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and the ghost of a terrible memory. Elias closed his eyes, the phrase echoing in the tomb of his mind. Don't kill me, my son. He reached for the leather journal. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with his spidery aged handwriting. It wasn't a diary of daily events. It was the story of the debt, the account he had promised himself he would leave behind, even if he couldn't speak the words aloud. He had to record the truth, the raw, agonizing truth of why he had begged his son for his life, long after the physical danger had passed. He opened the journal to the first page and began to read the story of how Julian, his beautiful, promising Julian, had been destroyed, not by an enemy, but by the very love Elias had tried to use as a shield. The journal entry for May 12, 2005, marked the beginning of the end. It was a simpler time then. Julian was 20, a junior in college, studying engineering, my engineering. He was brilliant, the star of his class, and the undisputed heir to Elias and Son Construction. He had his mother's kindness and my drive. I idolized him. I lived for his success. I had worked my fingers raw for 30 years. I wore cheap suits and drove an old truck long after I could afford better, all so that Julian wouldn't have to struggle. I wanted to give him a life without the fear of failure, a life paved with certainty, and that was my first, most unforgivable sin. I suffocated him with certainty. Elias paused, his eyes tracing the faded ink. He remembered the arguments, the subtle but insistent pressure he'd put on Julian. When Julian had nervously suggested studying art history, Elias had laughed it off, a booming, dismissive sound that crushed the fragile seedling of his son's true passion. Art history, son? That's a hobby, not a living. We build things in this family. We build legacies, he'd declared. Julian had capitulated, as he always did, enrolling in the rigorous engineering program. He earned the A's, won the scholarships, and even seemed to enjoy the challenge. But the light in his eyes, the one that used to glow when he sketched in his notebook, was slowly dimming. The summer of 2005 was the tipping point. The company was working on its most ambitious project yet, the Merriman Creek Bridge, a massive, high-stakes municipal contract that would cement Elias's place as the premier builder in the state. The margins were tight, the deadline tighter, and the pressure was immense. Elias had been cutting corners for months, small, desperate measures to ensure the profitability and timeline. He used a cheaper grade of steel rebar and non-critical supports. He pushed the concrete pour crew to work through heavy rain, risking the structural integrity. He justified it all with the same mantra: it's for Julian. It's for his future. Julian, working as an intern that summer, was the only person who noticed. He spent hours reviewing the schematics in the material logs. I found Julian in the home office late one night. He was bent over a set of blueprints, his face pale under the harsh lamplight. When he looked up, his eyes were full of a terrible knowledge. "Dad," he had whispered, his voice shaking. "The bridge, the specs for the central column foundation. They're wrong. The load-bearing calculation is off by almost 15%, and the steel log shows you substituted grade B rebar where the design called for grade A. If there's a serious surge or a major stress test—" "Don't be ridiculous, son," I had roared, standing over him, the fear instantly turning into defensive fury. "That bridge is solid. I've built dozens of bridges. I know what I'm doing. It's a calculation error in the report, nothing more. You're panicking." "I'm not panicking, Dad. I'm an engineer. This is mathematically unsound. You know, if the city inspectors find this, we'll lose everything. And if they don't, people will die." The last three words had hung in the air, a chilling prophecy. I remember my hands gripping the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles were white. The life I had built, the future I had envisioned for Julian, was suddenly teetering on a flaw I had introduced. My response was born of panic and a lifetime of being the man in charge. I didn't listen to his evidence. I attacked his character. "You are challenging me? Your father? The man who paid for that degree? You think your textbook knowledge trumps my 30 years of experience? You are weak, Julian. You don't have the stomach for what it takes to run a business. This conversation is over. You will forget you ever looked at that log. You will finish your internship and you will learn to trust the man who built this company." Julian hadn't argued back. He had simply folded the blueprints with agonizing precision and walked away. The incident became the new silence, a deeper, more toxic one than the art history dismissal. Julian kept working, but he was no longer my apprentice. He was my unwilling accomplice. 3 months later, the bridge was completed and hailed as a masterpiece of modern engineering. The celebratory ribbon cutting was attended by the mayor and broadcast on the evening news. Elias and Son Construction was untouchable. Julian stood next to his father in the photos, his smile as brittle as thin ice. Then came the rain. A 100-year storm descended on the region, swelling the Merriman Creek into a roaring, relentless torrent. The entry for October 23, 2005, was jagged and almost illegible, the ink smeared with what Elias knew was the residue of old tears. The news report. 6:15 a.m. A delivery truck, an articulated tanker, was crossing the Merriman Creek Bridge. The camera feed showed the water level had reached its crest. Then a sickening lurch, a sound like a giant tearing cloth, and the central column, the one Julian warned me about, failed. The whole structure buckled and collapsed into the churning water. The driver didn't make it. Elias paused his reading, his breath catching in his chest. The old man in the retirement home suddenly transported back to that morning, to the smell of rain and the sick taste of fear. The ensuing chaos was a blur of investigations, subpoenas, and lawyers. Elias had orchestrated a masterful cover-up. He bribed the first structural engineer on the scene, cooked the material logs, and used every political connection he had ever cultivated. He sacrificed his loyal foreman, a good man named Thomas, pinning the blame on substandard quality checks due to Thomas's supposed drinking problem. The full weight of the company's powerful legal team was thrown against the inquiry. In the end, Elias and Son Construction was cleared, deemed a victim of an unprecedented and unpredictable weather event. The tragedy was mourned, the victims compensated, and the story slowly faded from the headlines. Julian, however, was destroyed. He had witnessed his father sacrifice a life, sacrifice the truth, and sacrifice an innocent man to save his company. The ethical and moral collapse of his idol was a blow he could not withstand. Julian dropped out of his engineering program. He locked himself in his room for weeks, emerging only to stare at his father with an expression of pure, heartbreaking loathing. One night, 2 weeks after the ruling, Julian came to Elias's study. He held the original material log, the one Elias thought he had burned. Julian's eyes were red, devoid of sleep and peace. "I could go to the district attorney, Dad," Julian had said, his voice flat, emotionless. "I could show them this. They'd reopen the case. You'd lose the company, your freedom, your life's work. You'd lose everything." Elias remembered sinking into his chair, the grand leather throne of his success. The fear was a physical pressure on his chest, a lead weight. All his planning, all his sacrifice had led to this moment, his son holding the smoking gun. "Please, Julian," Elias had begged, the words tearing from his throat, stripped bare of all his authority and pride. "Don't kill me, my son. Don't take away the life I built. I did it for you. All of it was for you." Julian stared at him for a long, silent moment. The young man, full of youthful righteousness, finally saw the crumbling, desperate old man beneath the suit. He saw not a criminal, but a failure consumed by his own ambition, and the sight broke the last remaining piece of his son's soul. Julian did not turn him in. Instead, he took a lighter from the desk, carefully burned the log until it was ash, and dropped the remnants into the wastebasket. Then he looked Elias in the eye and said one last thing before walking out of the study and, essentially, out of his father's life. "You're right, Dad. I don't have the stomach for it. But you're wrong about something else. You didn't do it for me. You did it for you. And by asking me to carry this secret, by forcing me to choose between justice and your freedom, you already killed me. The man you wanted me to be is gone. What's left is just an empty vessel." Julian left engineering, went back to school for business, and transformed himself into the ruthless executive Elias saw today. A man focused only on profit, success, and the sterile pursuit of power. A man who had murdered his own moral compass for his father's sake. The ethical core that made him Julian was dead, and Elias was the executioner. Elias closed the journal, his chest heaving. The sheer volume of the narrative, a 20-year burden of guilt, felt heavier than any construction load he had ever calculated. His memory flashed forward to the present day. Julian had been gone for barely 5 minutes, but the silence had become unbearable. Elias knew he was running out of time. His heart was tired, his body frail. He had to finish his story, not just in the journal, but in the ears of his son. With an effort that felt like lifting a mountain, he pushed the emergency button on his call cord. A few moments later, Nurse Sandra, a kind woman with perpetually tired eyes, came in. "Everything all right, Mr. Thorne?" she asked gently. "No, Sandra," Elias said, his voice stronger than he felt. "It is not. I need you to do something for me. I need you to call my son, Julian. Tell him I'm having trouble breathing. Tell him to come back, now." Sandra looked concerned. She checked his vitals, steady, if weak. "Mr. Thorne, you seem fine. Are you sure you're not just anxious?" "I am sure," Elias insisted. "I am sure I need to see my son. It's an emergency of the soul, Sandra. Please, tell him I need him." Reluctantly, seeing the desperate plea in his eyes, Sandra nodded and left to make the call. Elias waited. He didn't know if Julian would return. The lie, the engineered emergency, was something he was ashamed of, but it was the only rebar strong enough to hold Julian's attention. He picked up the journal again and began writing the final entry, his hand shaking violently, his last confession. "He didn't turn me in. He took my life and my freedom, but he saved his own, hollow version of me." But in that moment, when he burned the evidence and the light went out of his eyes, I realized what a monster I had become. I didn't save his future. I stole his soul. I traded a good man's life, Thomas, a victim's life, the driver, and my son's moral integrity for a few more years of comfort in a corner office. Every success Julian has achieved since then, the promotions, the awards, the cold, calculating competence, is a monument to the part of him I murdered. He became everything I told him he needed to be: ruthless, driven, indifferent to human cost. He is the CEO I created, the man who lives by the philosophy that ends justify the means. He learned it from the master criminal, his father, and now I am here, in room 302. The successful businessman is a dying man, waiting for the only person he loves to forgive him for killing him. The door creaked open. Julian stood there again, his face a mask of annoyance and hurried concern. "Dad, what is it? Sandra said you—" He stopped when he saw Elias sitting up, breathing steadily, the journal clutched to his chest. "You lied. You pulled a stunt." Julian's voice was low and furious. "I left a critical meeting. Why did you do this?" "Sit down, Julian," Elias commanded, his voice suddenly infused with the old authority he hadn't used in years. "Please, I don't have time to be subtle anymore." Julian, despite his anger, recognized the finality in his father's tone. He sat, rigid, his arms crossed. "I called you back because I couldn't bear to let the silence kill me too," Elias began, placing the journal on the bed. "I know why you're here. You visit because you're a good son who honors his mother's memory and because you're too decent, too ethical, despite all my efforts to stamp it out, to leave an old man completely alone. You keep your distance because you hate the sight of the man who ruined your life." Julian shifted uncomfortably. "I don't hate you, Dad. I'm just disappointed, and I'm busy." "No," Elias countered. "Don't diminish it. It's hate, Julian, and you have every right to it. You know I confessed in the study that night, but I need to confess again, clearly, for both of us." Elias took a slow, labored breath. "The bridge. I cut the corners. I used the grade B rebar. I knew the danger, and I silenced you to save myself. I sacrificed Thomas, a good man, to protect my legacy. And when you confronted me, when you held that original log, I begged you, don't kill me, my son." Elias looked Julian directly in the eye, his own eyes brimming with the tears he'd held back for 2 decades. "I made you a monster to save myself, Julian, the man who values profit over people, the man who can coldly sacrifice a meeting for a dying parent, the man who lives without the burden of a moral conscience. That is the man I forged with my own selfishness. I didn't just kill the engineer in you, Julian. I killed your capacity for love, for joy, for simple decency, and I replaced it with ambition. That is the truth. That is the thing I have lived with, and it is the only thing I have left to give you." He pushed the journal across the bed toward Julian. "It's all here, everything. The plans, the real logs, the details of the cover-up, the names of the lawyers and the bribes. You can take this. You can finally tell the story, clear Thomas's name, expose my corruption, and save the memory of the good man your father used to be. You can bring justice, Julian. It will destroy the company. It will destroy my reputation, but it will finally set you free." Silence enveloped the room, heavy and absolute. The only sound was the infuriating tick of the clock. Julian stared at the journal, his expression unreadable, a battle raging in the depths of his cold corporate eyes. The leather cover seemed to glow with the toxic energy of the past. Julian slowly, deliberately reached out. He didn't touch the journal. He picked up the cheap bouquet of daisies instead. He stood up, towering over his frail father. "Justice?" Julian's voice was sharp, utterly devoid of warmth. "And what good would justice do now, Dad? You're dying. The company is too big, too powerful, It has hundreds of employees and billions in assets. If I expose the truth, I won't be hailed as a hero. I'll be labeled a whistleblower, a disgruntled executive, a traitor who destroyed his father's legacy for a pointless crusade of righteousness. He dropped the daisies back onto the bedside table. You asked me to be the good man you murdered 20 years ago. You asked me to trade the success I've built on the ruins of my own soul for a moment of moral purity. Julian leaned down, his face inches from Elias's, the scent of his cologne overpowering. I learned the lesson you taught me well, Father. The world does not reward the ethical. The world rewards the ruthless. You gave me the weapon, the lack of conscience, and I became the chief operating officer with it. I am no longer that panicked, moral boy. I am what you made me. I am the result of your ultimate decision. He gestured to the journal. That book is worthless. It's a dying man's last-ditch attempt at redemption, a final selfish act to ease your guilt. If I use it, I lose everything. And I will not lose everything, because I saw what losing everything did to you. It put you here, in this room, waiting for death. Julian straightened, his executive persona perfectly intact. I told you I am too busy for sentimentality. I am too successful for self-destruction. I will not trade my success for your peace. You live with your guilt, Dad. That's your punishment. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob, his face etched with a familiar cold determination. I won't kill you with justice, Julian finished, his voice a low, chilling verdict. I'll kill you with indifference. I'll see you next month. And then he was gone, for good this time. Elias did not call for the nurse. He did not cry. He looked down at the journal, the weight of his unconfessed sin now a permanent fixture in the silence. He had asked his son to kill the monster he had created, but the monster was too strong, too well fed on success and corporate logic. He lay back against the pillows, the ticking clock relentless. His last attempt at redemption had failed, not because his son was a true villain, but because Julian was a perfect mirror of his father's worst parts. Julian had become the executioner of his own humanity, and now he was leaving his father to die alone, a fate Elias knew he deserved. He closed his eyes. The breath he took was shallow, the next one shallower. The final, terrible realization settled over him like a shroud. Julian hadn't just rejected the confession, he had delivered the coup de grace. The sound of the clock's tick-tock slowly faded, replaced by the memory of rushing water. Elias Thorne, the man who built a corrupt empire, died in the quiet solitude of room 302, Evergreen Retirement Home. His story ended not with a bang of justice, but with the cold whisper of abandonment, the ultimate agonizing realization that he had indeed killed his son, only to be killed in return by the very apathy he had nurtured. The journal lay open on the bed, its last pages blank. The story of Elias was over.